If you had been president of the United States when the planes hit the World Trade Center, what would you have done?
I would have, I would have immediately forgiven them and asked them to please forgive the United States for all the violence we have committed over the years. I agree with Martin Luther King that the United States government is the world's most violent. In just the past 20 years, we've invaded Libya, Grenada, Panama, Somalia, Haiti, Afghanistan, Sudan, back to Iraq, back to Afghanistan. And King was convinced that we were the most violent government. He was roundly condemned by that, by the so-called liberal media, New York Times. Oh, you're way over your head. Let's stick this thing and we shall overcome. The Post criticized him. Oh, you demean civil rights movement. We should have forgiven them and then please forgive us and let's start over, because killing is clearly not working. That's a minority view, but I do believe it. I do believe it. I think Gandhi would agree with that. I think Martin Luther King would agree with that. Dorothy Day, the pacifists would take up that argument.
So what if you didn't do anything and you immediately forgave them, and the next time they flew a plane to the Capitol, let's say a month later, what would you have done then?
Well, if I were president, I would have immediately gotten on a plane and gone to Afghanistan and gone to Iraq to talk to Saddam Hussein. The same way Richard Nixon went to China after demonizing them for a long time. He sat down, he talked, negotiated, compromised, reconciled, and now China's not only trading with us, they're loaning us money. They're laughing at us. We're loaning money to the capitalists. Reagan, a good Republican, went to the Soviet Union. He talked, negotiated, compromised, and now they're trading with us. That's what rational people do. But to go kill civilians in Afghanistan and Iraq, we don't even know the suffering that goes on. It's what we call cold violence, as against hot violence. 9/11 was hot violence. You felt it. It was emotional. It was visceral. And then you have cold, out-of-sight violence. The bombing of Iraqi people, the bombing of Afghanistan people. And we're a militarized economy, militarized government. Our government now spends $2.5 billion a day on military programs. That's 10 times more than what the Peace Corps gets in a year. That tells you something. That's why King also said on that great speech in Riverside Church, April 4, '67, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on programs of military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Hard talk, but I think accurate talk. You can fight fire with fire, or you can fight fire with water. I think water is the solution. If we keep on arming ourselves and keep settling conflicts by killing people, it doesn't seem to be working. There are other ways. In just the past 20 years, there have been at least 6 or 7 brutal governments overthrown through nonviolent force. Marcos was driven from power, 1986, Philippines. Driven by Catholic nuns who organized under James Sharp at Harvard. Pinochet driven from power by people who organized to get a fair election. Lech Walesa, shipyard worker in Poland, drove the Soviet Union. It wasn't Reagan who did it. It wasn't the Pope who did it. It was Lech Walesa and the Solidarity Union. Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, former political prisoner, became president of the country. Mandela in South Africa, the boycotts finally worked. Shevardnadze, Republic of Georgia, driven from power. Now, if someone came to you 20 years ago and said, you know, I think in the next 2 decades, there's going to be at least 6 or 7 brutal governments overthrown by people with no army, no tanks, and no bombs, you'd have said, friend, you're clearly dreaming. It will never happen. But it did happen. So that's right in front of us. So I make sure I teach that to my students so they know there are other ways to solve conflicts without using fists, guns, armies, bombs, or nukes.
At University District of Columbia, I was the president of the Pan-African Student Union. We did an 11-day nonviolent demonstration on campus, shut the school down for 11 days to get student rights. And prior to that, I was at Georgetown, and we led a movement to bring about divestment from South Africa in the 80s, when that was a popular movement, and that of course led to the sanctions and the end of apartheid.
Are you a pacifist?
Yeah, I believe so. Although I do believe in civil disobedience. I believe in Dr. King's philosophy that you need to have some agitation to bring about change, but you can do it nonviolently.
What I liked about the alternatives violence class was the relationship that Coleman had with his students. He encouraged us to be honest and to speak the truth and not be nervous and not be shy and just speak whatever's on our minds.
Coleman marches to the beat of his own drum. I took him in high school, and you know, he's just an original thinker, and of course he's an intellectual. You know, that's an understatement. To live with enlightened anarchy, it might be a pipe dream, but you got people out there like Coleman who are givers and not takers, really dedicate themselves to education and dedicate themselves to other people. They're other-centered people. They're not self-centered people. And, you know, in anarchy, I think it's possible. And, you know, it would be interesting to see. I hope I'm around for that day.
Coleman's class, I took Coleman's class last fall, and I loved his style of teaching, like love-based. You know, we learned different, it's called Principles and Practices of Peace, and he really brought that to the classroom. I loved it.
Love-based anarchy to me is something that sounds really, really wonderful and possible in a very distant future, but Coleman has started us thinking about it.
What is your take on enlightened anarchy? Is it possible mankind can get there?
Well, it's pretty tough. In my setting, Mac, anarchy would not work. The smallest and the most vulnerable voices would not be heard in the mayhem of the ER.
Doc, what's runner's high? Does it exist?
I think it does. I don't think anybody is 100% sure why it exists. The neurohumoral basis for it is unclear. It's probably that the body is producing something like morphine in fairly extreme physiologic circumstances, i.e. like a marathon or when somebody's been pushed to the max in terms of their exercise. But I don't know that anybody truly knows exactly why it happens, but it's been described for so long that I really think it does exist, and we just have to figure out why.
Enlightened anarchy, I prefer to think of it as love-based anarchy. And love-based anarchy would be a wonderful way for our society to live. But as a society, we are not enlightened enough yet to do that. The reason love-based anarchy cannot flourish in the world is because there's too much fear. Fear is holding us back. I wish I was enlightened enough to live by love-based anarchy, but I think we all have an inner fear which comes from our original sin. And once we can let that go, love-based anarchy would work. I think bandits should be encouraged. I like the fact that bandits get out there and do their own thing and get out and run. I think it's a wonderful thing. I love Coleman's take because I love reading Coleman's articles. I love discussing issues with Coleman because Coleman is extremely consistent. He has a consistency that I value and respect, and something that I strive for in my own life.